begin with, I would like to thank you for coming to listen to what I have to say about moment forming and integration. It would be useful to spend a few moments on explaining what I mean by a musical moment. When certain characteristics remain constant for a while, a moment is going on. In musical terms, when sounds occur in a certain region, certain register, or in a region of certain dynamics, or of certain average speed or tempo, then these characteristics determine the moment. A limited number of chords in the field of harmonic construction, of intervals, which means measured distances between pitches in the melodic construction, of durations in the rhythmic construction, of colors in the coloristic construction. When these characteristics change all of a sudden, a new moment begins. When they change very slowly, a new moment is going to begin, and the present moment is still going on. If we are in this room tonight, the measures of this room, the number of participants in this meeting, to a certain extent the quality of the people, all these components determine this moment. When you leave this hall, one by one, starting right now, and the last one would leave this hall after about 2 hours, when I'm going to leave, approximately, then the change from this moment to the next moment, which is the moment of going home or going somewhere else, will be very slow. Whereas when all of a sudden this floor breaks or there will be an explosion, then the moment changes to the next moment very quickly, abruptly. The degree of change is something that can become the quality which is considered during the act of composing, rather than what is changing. I can, for example, compose with a series of degrees of changes, or we can call them degrees of renewal, and then start with anything and follow the degree of change from 0 to a defined maximum, and then reach something else. Reach at something else. That is, as I understand, the moment forming. I form something which is as unique, as strong, as present as possible. Or I experience something. And then I can decide as a composer, or also as the person who experiences, how quickly and with what a degree of change the next moment is going to occur. MOMENTE is a composition which I started in January 1961, And during the first week, I designed and wrote all the sketches for the overall plan for the formal process. For those who know the works that I composed before, it will be very clear that all the determinations have not just fallen from the sky, but they were prepared here and there in other works. For example, the controlled randomness of the form, or the mobility of the form as compared to an immobile fixed object. I will explain what that means. There are three groups of moments, so-called M moments, in which the melodic characteristics are predominating. You see here on this board letters, before all in black color, and the first group up to here is always determined by a capital M at the beginning. There's a center which is just pure M. There's an M with a D index, an M with a K index, and derived from these there are always a pair of other combinations. They are the melodic moments, the M moments. Horizontality, heterophony. For those who do not know what I mean by heterophony, or what we usually mean by heterophony, heterophony is a way of articulating sound events around a line. I say around a line because let's say you have any line. And then this line can be just a glissando. But, I mean, the speed is not defined. This would be just 2 seconds, as I performed right now. Now, heterophony means that more than one sound source, let's say voices, instruments, can produce this line at the same time. And they will never be completely synchronous if they are not following the same synchronizing device, like a clock or a beat or counting device. So they will all, for example, do something like this, etc. Well, the third one, so there is something happening as the result of the interference of several lines trying to go in parallel, which will produce something that is no longer a clear line, but a heterophonic event. Now, if this is not simply happening by chance, but in a very controlled way, like in, let's say, in a lot of folklore music, then someone is, let's say, playing this line with little sustained notes. Another one is playing this line with dots or little groups. Etc. You see more and more that in such a process the line can have any thickness. And now from the beginning on, I could start defining how thick the line is, the melody is in certain moments. And then this space can be filled with all sorts of activities. I mean, the space between the black line and the green line that I have just drawn. So all this can be filled out. It's still a melody, but it's heterophony. Hetero means many. Phony, Phony means to sound together. So it could be all filled out. You find this in Balinese music, for example, very often, or in Vietnamese music, in folklore music. Also in our music, nowadays in particular, where composers write a melody and then make the melody more or less wide. I wrote heterophony here underneath the group of the M moments. It's still the horizontal. Then there's a second group which is called the K moments. That comes from the German. It means Klang, sound, verticality. Everything that sounds together. Control of spectrums, sound spectrums. Chordal control, homophony, which means the control of vertical layers is involved. Homophonic music. K, Klang. A third group is based on D, duration. Dauer in German, it's the same. Like melody in German also means melody. Dauer. And moments which are primarily based on principles of dealing with measured durations, all of different lengths, produces two very important characteristics of any musical construction. One is silence, and the other one is polyphony. Polyphony, which means the combination of more or less independent layers which are simultaneously combined, which is sounding simultaneously. And I would like to explain this. When I have this line here, and it goes on, such a line, then duration is not really involved as measuring or controlling device. But the moment I start cutting this into sections, then I have to deal with different durations. So I cut a melody into different sections and I get duration. This one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And the cutting produces automatically the possibility to separate the fragments of a melody, which means to produce silence. Now I can take this one and then start this one later. See what I mean? Silence is the result of the concept of durations, to deal with durations. That produces silence, to break the time, the flow. Second, I can naturally now, once I have cut something, superimpose. Not just that I separate it, but that I superimpose it. Because these sections become independent. And that produces polyphony. The principle of polyphony and the principle of sound is based on the differentiation of durations. That is very general, this principle. That's why I say polyphony being the most characteristic articulation, forming of moments which are based on differences of durations. Now let's very quickly analyze what I have done in relating. Once I have separated the characteristics as much as possible, like a purely melodical moment, a purely verticalized moment, Klang moment, sound moment, a purely durational moment, polyphonic moment, I derive from these centers moments which have something in common, more or less, with the others. So there is an M moment which has a component of K. And to be explicit how I did it in Momente, it's about 30%. There is a moment which has a component of D characteristics. The M moment with a small index of K has two possibilities, an M with a capital K, which means they are almost equal in importance with a slight predomination of the M moment, with an index of D, of the durational moments. There is an M and capital K moment which is almost balanced, a balanced combination of M and K with slight, as I say, slight predominance of M. Here in that section you will find exactly the opposite. MK, here you must find a KM, which is here. And here you have an MD small k, so here you must have a KM small d, or a KD small m. And this MD is corresponding to the DM over here. You see, you find now in the different layers of, these are the centers, then moments which are the first generation, always the same characteristics, a D with a DM and a DK, small k, a K with a KM and a KD, an M with an MD and an MK. Which means that starting with the concept, I create moments, I make moments which are as independent as possible. Now I build up a whole tree of different generations by interrelating moments, and I can very carefully control how much they have in common. Rather than starting with the traditional concept of building a continuity and insert breaks, producing sudden changes in order to renew the context. That was the traditional concept of building any continuity, any process. One was composing something very homogeneous and then broke the homogeneity by inserting surprises or contrasts. Whereas we start here with a concept, we begin to think in a concept which is quite the opposite. We start with completely separate instants. Now, I said, in another context, here and now. Now. And then only I begin to determine how much the now may have as memory or hope, which means being related to what has happened before or what will happen next. I should say immediately that the mobility, which I mentioned in the beginning, functions in the following way. The K moments always remain in the center of the work when it is performed. But for a particular performance, the conductor makes a so-called version. He decides upon the order of the moments, which are all available as graphic material. I mean, written out in notes and graphic designs, and in most of the cases each moment is one large page. Speaker of the material aspect. The K moments are always in the center, but the D and M moments can be interchanged, which means we can have all the D moments at the beginning, and then the K, and then the M moments. Then we have moments which are drawn on the board in red color, which are all I moments. We have an I with M characteristics, an I with D characteristics, an I with K characteristics, an I with no particular characteristic, it's just an I moment. And the I means informal or extremely indeterminate moments. They are fairly vague, static, without direction, neutralizing the large blocks. And they are actually the longest moments in the whole work. And these I moments can equally change their position. The IM and the IK can change their position. The pure I is always at the end, never changes its position. And the idea, ID, is always between these two, which means when M switches, then D is always connected to the M moments. It cannot switch position without that this group changes too. So what happens to the large groups also happens within each group. There is a center, and around this center we have, let's start in the middle, we have the two subgroups that can change position. It's like a mobile. And within each subgroup we have again a center, and the two around it can change position. And here too. Which means we have now a large amount of possibilities of combining these musical moments into a definite version, which means a fixed object for a particular performance or series of performances. And in this work, it is the case that when you change the position, it changes quite a lot, because the characters of the moment differ extremely. So you might have something very slow, where in another version you get something extremely active and fast, which is then balanced much later with its counterpart. What I have said about the central moments, their mobility applies naturally to this group as well, except there is one special arrangement. There is an MM moment, a so-called totally self-related moment, an M which reflects on itself. This is the only moment which is a pure combination of total verticality and horizontality of the melody, which, so to speak, turns upside down. It turns vertical. There's a solo of one voice, always opposed to blocks. I will explain this later, what kind of instruments and voices are used in the different groups. There is an MM. In the third group we have, in order to balance this MM, 4 groups here on top, which the others don't have. Another generation, so to speak. The I moments, I said, last the longest, and they have, if I recall well, a ratio of, I think, 4 to 5 in their duration. Approximately, let's say now, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 1/4 minute, and again 4 to 5. This one, you can calculate this out. It's about 7.5. What is it? 8. Then all these moments here, the D, K, and M, are moments of 2 minutes length in clock time. That duration is a theoretical one. It will change the moment these moments are put into a certain order. Then influences start to work out and change the duration. But they are basically 2 minutes long. And these are all 1 minute long. And these are all half a minute long. And these 4 are 1/4 of a minute each. And they are balanced out with that one, which is 1 minute long. 4 times 1/4 of a minute is balanced out with this 1 minute in time. And what I have said now about the durations also applies to the inner energy that is given by the material and the definition of the activity within each moment. similar procedure. Let's look at the top of the board. In all the M moments, the solo soprano, we come to the material now, a solo soprano is predominating as the most linear sound element in this composition. Then, among the instruments which are used, brass instruments, 4 trumpets and 4 trombones. Then, whenever the solo soprano produces sound, everything that has to do with speaking, also the speaking melodically, etc., is predominating. Then everything that is, and this is clear now after what I have said about heterophony and the horizontal principle, that is randomness within certain limits in time, distribution of elements, of pitches, of timbres, of colors, of durations, randomness is most characteristic for everything that is M, which means the most M moment, the center, will be the moment which is predominantly statistical. Statistic, excuse me. Where the elements are distributed with an extreme randomness. The middle group has male voices of a large choir, predominantly. When there's a pure K moment, there are only male voices, and among the instruments, percussion. Percussion of the different groups, the metallophones, large tam-tam, cymbals, and then percussion with fixed pitches of metal, which is the vibraphone. Then skin instruments, also from the most approximate to the most defined pitches, a special drum that I have discovered, a kidney-shaped drum, which permits to produce glissandos on a drum and very precise pitches in a scale. Then, all sorts of instruments that produce sounds like consonants, etc. Then in the third group we have predominantly female voices. They must be clear for polyphony. So in higher regions where we hear better the lines, the melodies clearly, which are composed polyphonically, and electric organs which can measure the durations without a natural decay of the dynamics, which is the case for brass instruments among these, or voices. The electric organs permit to measure the durations very sharply and clearly. In particular, the ends of each duration. Then singing is predominant, whereas in the middle part, I forgot to say that, whispering, noisy, everything that has to do with whispering, also now for the choirs, shuffling with the feet, everything that resembles to whispering and noises, or this, or this, everything that resembles to these sounds that go into the direction of voiceless consonants, predominating here. So whenever this occurs here, then we are sure there is an influence. Whereas everything is here, I said, is speaking. From normal, ordinary speaking to the most artificial speaking. And here it's singing. Now you can imagine once you start with, I said irregularity as being one of the characteristics in the field of distribution of elements, statistic, random, periodic, extreme periodicity, regularity, and irregular. I said, now you can imagine, once you start with the definition of a certain moment D, small m, then you have, let's say, singing, with a little of whispering or clicking or something that comes from M in here. So we get now influences in very precise dosing. How much from other moments are going to influence this particular one? You can imagine yourself how such a combination can be composed, put together with the different ingredients. So the same applies to rhythmic combinations. For example, when I have a periodic moment K with a small m, then there will be extreme periodicity, and at a moment it starts floating around because there's statistical influence in rhythm from m. And then it goes on periodically. Or they may be superimposed in two layers. One layer has random distribution of elements in time, and there's the predominant layer which is periodic, etc. We might say still something else. There are great contrasts in the first groups of M, contrasts of speeds, of sound and silence, etc. Great contrast in all the different fields, medium contrasts and small contrasts. Then I have drawn green boxes. To each moment belongs a green box, and what is written in these green boxes occurs in the final score, actually on each page. Let's say this is a moment. No, I should make two. MKD, which has these indications. And there's another moment, MK, which has these indications. Let us assume that these moments follow each other, like it is the case in this formal scheme. MKD and MK. Right. And what is in the green box, I have copied over there. Arrows. The arrows mean the following. If an arrow is pointing to the next moment, to the future, to the right side, considering that the horizontal line represents time, earlier, later, then this arrow says, take something out of this moment and put it into the next one. And this is physically done in the following way. Together with each musical moment which is written on a page, there comes a certain number of small papers which have the same name with a small number, and it says insert MKD1, insert MKD2, insert MKD3. These are small pieces of paper, and on each piece there is a certain excerpt copied from the moment itself, and it is an excerpt which is quite characteristic. These are small pieces of paper. They look even physically like this. They come with a score. Let's say a piece would look like this. There's even attached here another piece of paper, and then in each moment there are slits cut in. They come with the score. And when there's an arrow pointing, let's say, to the next one, then you take one which has the same name and put it into the slit of the next one. And then there are a lot of instructions which tell you what's going to happen when this insert is put into that particular moment. Then it has a certain length, it has a certain dynamic curve, it has a certain speed, etc. If it is put into somewhere else, it has another length, another duration, another speed. It is covered by the sounds that are in that particular moment. They are sustained while this insert is put into this moment. I come to this later on. Arrow pointing to the next moment says, take an insert of that particular moment and put it into the next one, following one. An arrow coming at the left side, coming, says take an insert from the previous moment and put it into this one. An arrow coming from the future, if we consider that this is the future, a moment which might follow, because we don't know yet which one will follow until we have made a version. Then it says take an insert from the next one and put it into here. Or here it says take a moment from this one and put it into the two previous ones. So you need two moments, two inserts, one for the previous one and one for the one before the previous one. So all of a sudden, between a moment which doesn't give anything and doesn't take anything, like this one, 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 and like this one, and this one, they are neutral. Between this one extreme of extreme self-containment, if I can say that, not taking and not giving, and the other extreme, that there are moments which are extremely related to their environment, to what happened before and afterwards. Let's say, here, there's such a moment. He takes something from the next one, he takes something from the previous one, he gives himself something from the previous to the previous one, and he gives two inserts to the two following ones. Between such extremes, there are many degrees of interrelations, degrees of connections, which are now determined by me. Now please watch the activities that I have determined. In the N moments, we have, I should start with the middle one. The K moments are all active. There's not a single moment which has an arrow pointing to the moment itself. This one influences the previous one. In this connection, that means here will be a small insert from this one, like an announcement. One doesn't know what it means, and then later on, when this moment comes, I understand, aha, that was an announcement, because now we have more of it. Now it becomes predominating. What was here only something out of the sky, and we didn't know what it meant. That is produced by this arrow. Activity towards the past. Then here, the same activity with a plus and minus. It says, take an insert, put it into the previous moment, which is this one. And then this previous moment must be played once with this insert and once without, plus and minus. So it must be repeated once it is influenced by this one. Neutrality. Here, give something to the previous and something to the following one. All activity goes out of the moments. Here we have moments where all activity draws something into the present moment. And in the first moments we have taking and giving, influencing and being influenced. In each moment. This one I have already discussed. Taking and giving, activity and receptivity. Here the same, taking and giving. Taking and giving to the past. This is opposed to this one. From the future, the next moment. And this taking and giving. We have combinations. And everything that is written now in blue indicates the degree of interrelations between the musical moments. What I have indicated with this sign says what is taken in, slids. This moment must have two slids, though it is neutral, but wherever it is, I have controlled how much it can be influenced in certain environments, so it can, in an extreme position, this you cannot follow so quickly, but you have to believe it, in a certain position, it must take two, then there are two slids, and it must provide one insert for another moment that wants something from this one. So we have receptivity of 2, degree of 2, and activity of 1, influencing others. Here we have taking 3 and preparing for certain connections 2. They are not always used, but I must indicate the extreme positions where there is the maximum of being influenced and influencing others. Here we have taking 2, giving 2, taking 3, giving 3, taking 2, giving 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. Now compare it with this one, 4 and 4, which means this moment, and please realize what I'm going to say now, this moment will be very weak. The strongest moment is the moment which takes the least and gives the least. And the weakest moment, which means the moment which you can in the extreme hardly recognize as a moment because it has so much in common with what happened before and what's going to happen afterwards, that is a moment which is highly influenced, already announced several times, and still remembered several times. What I say here about musical moments certainly applies to everything, to people too. People who are so much filled with memory and hope hardly exist as individuals, or are so much influenced by others that you don't know what they are any longer. You get confused because you see more reflections in them than what they really are. And this is, for example, another extreme. He doesn't take anything, he doesn't need any slid, but he influences the others. This is a very strong moment compared to others, which are filled with other influences and are remembered and announced many times. Just compare these numbers. When I stopped the degree of influence, nowadays, for example, once this whole, if I can say, way of thinking, of composing, the moment forming has become more natural to me, I can envisage easily musical forms in which, well, let's say everything that has been separated here by a stroke would be an entity of different character. And I would just decide I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possibilities. That the first one would be extremely active. It could influence all the others. The second one wouldn't do anything. The third one would influence just to the degree of 2. Let's say 1 here, and 1 would be remembered once more. So 1, 2, 3. The third one would have the degree of influence 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There and here something would occur from this moment. You see, you know what I mean? It influences others. So we have the degree of 4, of 2, of 0, and of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you want to serialize the degree of influencing others, just concerning activity, I'm not speaking about receptivity at the moment, and we could continue. We have here 2, 6, then here we have, no, we should do it like this, 6, then 0, 2, 4, so we would have 5 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 more, 5. 6, 0, 2, 5, 4, and let's say 1. This one is just the influence of 1, and it would be very mysterious, and it's just announced 1 in the very beginning, and then nothing occurs for a long time, and then all of a sudden it comes. And only then we begin to, if we still can remember, so this must be very strong, and something very unexpected from this moment. Then we have 1. 6, 0, 2, 4, 5, 1, 3. That's what is lacking. So we have 3. Then we have a serial control, so-called serial control, of the interrelation of musical moments. You see, that's the way you could compose whole novels, theater pieces, architecture, anything. The interrelation of certain parts that are as strongly as conceived as strongly as possible, as independent as possible, then afterwards you begin to compose the different degrees of interrelationships. What is more interesting now in Momente, this particular composition, is that what happens, I have already mentioned this before, what happens if an insert comes into a moment. Let's say this is the moment, a page, and it would have an arrow here. Draws an insert from the previous one, and then this one would be put into here. You must shout when you cannot read anymore what I'm doing. Then it never happens in moments, in Momente, that it is just mechanically put into a context and nothing has changed. Because the context always changes the duration, which means if an insert from a shorter moment is put into a longer one, then the duration of the insert automatically doubles or quadruples or is eightfold according to the layer into which the insert is put. And if an insert from a longer moment is put into a shorter one, then the tempo is proportionally faster, twice as fast, or 4 times as fast, or 8 times as fast. This can result into a temporal distortion, that's something that lasts, let's say, 2 seconds in its own moment. When it's put into a moment that is 8 times as slow, then it is 16 seconds long, etc. And the vice versa. Something that lasts, let's say, half a minute, a long insert of one of those long I moments, this sometimes happens, and it is extremely long, slow. It is condensed to such an extent that if it comes into one of these, then it is 2, 4, 8, 16 times shorter, etc. And the same, what I'm saying about the durations, applies also to the transformation of the insert by the environment when notes which happen before such an insert in the moment are held over the insert. Then what is happening inside of the insert is transformed by the environment, harmonically and melodically. It's covered up, for example. Let's say here were a chord of brass, and here a vocal element is coming in from another moment, male voices. Then the chord of brass is held over this insert and transforms it. Then also the dynamics of each insert are transformed by the environment. I have to say something about the dynamics. The M moments are primarily medium loud. So the pure M moment is medium loud. I have indicated in an index that twice, very short, there should be a fortissimo accent and once a pianissimo insert. Because even the pure moments are slightly related to the others. Here we have everything extremely loud as the basic dynamics, and here extremely soft, the pianissimo. The double P is in each moment the predominating dynamics of the D moment. I haven't continued this here for these, but here I have completed the indication. Everything is fortissimo, 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 fortissimo. And then if it is, let's say, a K with a small m, then it is fortissimo with a fraction of the moment, mezzo forte, which comes from here. They are all mezzo forte. Medium loud, mezzo forte, mezzo forte, mezzo forte, mezzo forte, mezzo forte, mezzo forte, mezzo forte. So naturally, a K with an M has fortissimo with a mezzo forte. And a small index is always indicated by a proportion of 1/7. So the proportion here is 6:1 of the total time. 6 portions of the time of that moment are fortissimo, and 1 portion is mezzo forte. Here's the same. And K with a D has fortissimo as the basic dynamics, and 1 portion of the 7, if the total are considered being 7 time units, then 1 of these 7 is pianissimo because of the influence of D, which comes from here. Let's just briefly go through it. I think it's worthwhile. We have mezzo forte, M, and the small k indicates fortissimo, influence from here, in a proportion of 6:1. So in this moment, 6, let's say it were 60 seconds long, then 50 seconds, then no, that is difficult. Well, why not? It makes 8.5 or that to make 60 divided by 7. And then 8.5, so which means we have 6, which means 51. We have 51 seconds mezzo forte, and the rest, the 9 seconds, would be fortissimo. Then here we have, for example, the M with the K, which is mezzo forte, with the tendency to K is fortissimo, and a small d, which is pianissimo. So we have 5:1 as a proportion, and the 1 must be subdivided again so that the fortissimo is slightly predominating. M and K is mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo. That comes from the K. I subdivided in forte and fortissimo here in order to have a subdivision of 7 units, 4 plus 2 plus 1. 4 to 2 to 1 proportion. MD, the same, mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo, 4 to 2 to 1. Yes. There you see how even the dynamics and the proportion of the dynamics within each moment are the result of the influences that I have defined by the genesis of these layers of moments. I would say, before I say a few more words about the other characteristics of momente, we hear the first half of the recording. Up to now, there have been performances, several performances, which I have all conducted. And all the D moments have not yet been performed. They will be performed at the end of this year in the first total performance of the total work. The work lasts an hour and a half, and in 1965 I conducted the last performances of Momente on a tour, and we performed up to here. There was no time at that time to perform to rehearse the whole work. This year we will have for the first time the possibility to perform the whole work. And actually the performance that I conducted is in this order. That's why I wrote it in this order. The next performance that I'm going to conduct at the end of this year will change this order. I put the moments in a different order. And the tape now stops after 30 minutes, about 30 minutes, I think 29 and a half minutes, right here, before this moment. There. And then the continuation of the tape on the second tape begins with this moment and then goes up to here. And instead of the IK moment, but that doesn't mean very much to you, the I moment is here, and the IK moment has never been performed yet. So the I, the end, always is the end, and in this particular performance comes here. Do you have any practical questions before I play the tape? I have, for example, announced in the title moment forming and integration. The second word I mention in this very moment for the first time tonight, integration. But I hope that it has become clear that I have been talking now for almost half an hour about integration. How much a given moment is able or is to integrate of other moments. And to what extent it integrates parts of moments that have been heard before and that are going to be heard afterwards. It's all a process of very conscious integration of, I'm dealing with degrees of integration. How much and from which moment in any given musical event I'm integrating. You will hear later on how this works, for example, on the level of language, or the use of material that can be sung, spoken, whispered, etc. What kind of language material and how language material can be integrated. And to what extent? Let's say you have a moment which is in a certain language, and how much it can integrate as an insert from another language. Just to give you an idea.
Would you indicate which moment you may be at during the tape?
Would you like to? Would that be of help? I mean, we are now very much in the visual. You see, if I can do this naturally, it's very, very easy, but then I just point on a block. Would it not be more adventurous to try to find out if you feel when the moment changes, and to what extent it changes, and to get confused? I mean, I can do that, but that's well. Who wants me to point at the blackboard when a new moment is coming? You see, I had in mind to even switch off the lights and let you hear, experience the music.
You can do that at home.
Oh, you have the record?
Yes. We can close our eyes if we don't want to.
Oh, that's a good idea, yes. It needs an effort, doesn't it? I mean, even a physical effort. Yes, if you want. He says we can close our eyes if we don't want to see these things there, these symbols. Yes.
Did you have material before you planned this gig, or did the actual material come after you planned?
During. There was certain feedback, you see. I had certain material in mind. I thought I restrict myself to the extreme. I was thinking of the minimum of reformers, choir, and that was clear to me. I wanted to integrate language, and all aspects of language, voices, and so naturally, solo voice and groups of voices. Then instruments, yes, but then with the organization of the musical moments, for example, I had oboes in mind, and I forgot about them during the work more and more. I wanted to combine with trumpets, oboes, and also other instruments, but the more I dived into this structuring, this moment forming, the less material I needed. Because the more it became interesting for me to calculate very carefully how much the moments would have in common and how little they would have in common. The choice of material then was firmly related to the structuring of the musical entities, yes.
I do think it would be more interesting if you followed your own idea and you switched out the lights and then the total music.
Yeah, there's a gentleman who says it would be more interesting if I would, if I would switch off the lights and you would try to experience. Because this is so simple now. I treat you now like in a kindergarten, you see. I say, here. If I do this, then you say, aha, yes, naturally. It's the aha effect, as we say.
How do you express the pitch of your music in notation? And is there any connection between orthodox notation and the way you write
Yes,
your
I mean, give me an answer yourself after what I have said. What would you imagine an extreme verticalism, homophony, and periodicity? What kind of notation would you use here? An extremely determinate one, which means the classical notation we will find mostly here. In the statistic one, we will find graphic notation. Everything that is primarily M, statistic, randomness, has fields inside of which certain elements can be distributed freely. There the pitch notation is less determinate, more indeterminate. To a great degree, sometimes they're just lines. Or for the choir, I just say this is the highest, this is the lowest. I assist them without note lines, and I make boy, ba, 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 do, etc. So then it's relative. And the same applies to time, where I write a time box, and here is the cue of a conductor, here's the cue of a conductor, and I just write 7. And during this time, you have the possibility of 7 strokes on drums, on any drums, for a drum player. And whenever, or I give, for example, 7 syllables, and I write them on top of each other. Perhaps there's some more space. For example, I write O, or poo, or boy, boy. Phonetic writing, everything that is nonsense, that consists of nonsense syllables or onomatopoetic syllables, is written in phonetic writing. Boy, or etc. Boy, or poo, or oh, etc. And then I say to every male singer of a group gets, let's say, 5 or 6 during a certain time, which may be 2 minutes. And then the solo soprano is singing something, and you just say, comment the solo soprano with these syllables whenever you like. So there's an extreme randomness of the distribution in time, and even of the order. They can use it in any order. When they listen to the solo soprano, even watch the solo soprano, whatever she sings, then they say, po, or they say, poi, or they say, ho la la. You see, it applies. It is right to do this, etc.
Yes, but you can be very precise on your notation for pitch. You can be very precise on your notation for time, but you cannot be precise for dynamics. And if you're using such things as forte and mezzo forte, it's a very imprecise notation.
How would you
get
change
over
that? How would you change that?
This is, I'm asking you, if you need to quote it precisely. The rest of your notation is precise, but when your dynamics come in, they're imprecise because of the existing notation.
Well, how would you change this?
I don't know. I'm asking whether you have found any notation which will allow you to do this.
Well, not for male singing. For choir singers up to the moment. Not for individual notes, no. I can compose scales of dynamics by determining the number of musicians that are playing the same note at the same time. So I work secretly with large scales of dynamics where the individual musician doesn't know that he is contributing to a definite degree of dynamics. But when I have just one line, then all I can use are the 6 or 7 Latin letters, M, F, M, P, or P, or F, and double F and double P in order to indicate levels. This is a historical fact. I have mentioned this several times. We have a natural hierarchy in music. Music is as young as everything is on this globe. Just 1,000 years. We know a little about notating sounds and their characteristics. So in the pitches, they started with the pitches. So the pitches are the most precisely notated nowadays. Then, much later, 200-300 years, they started to notate durations more precisely. Again, 200-300 years, they started to notate, the different dynamics. Because before they had just terraces, softer or loud, that was all. The so-called terrace dynamics, and they were not in function. Were just overall determinations. And then again, 200-300 years, they began to differentiate the timbres. And in the middle of this century, I started to notate the direction and the speed of sound in a space, from where it comes, and I'm trying to find new ways of notating movements in a given space for sounds, and a complete new notation. I'm more than concerned with how people who fly with airplanes describe certain points in space, or who are on the ocean on ships, how they describe in a 360-degree environment, and if it is a half sphere, how you can describe a sound that goes in this movement. Well, you have to find a notation, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. So, for the dynamics, naturally too, if I have found notations, quite a few very efficient ones, but it's very difficult to write them for musicians who are not trained to do more than 6 or 7 degrees of dynamics consciously. I don't know. But that is already something, isn't it? Yeah, something else?
Yeah, weren't the statistics and the graphical processes in your first section tend to invalidate the degree of integration which you've carefully worked out between the moments?
Yeah. What? What's the question?
Your statistic and graphical methods in this first section here, won't they tend to invalidate the very careful degrees of integration which you've worked out between your layers of moments?
There is some misunderstanding when I speak about statistic. It simply says that a certain number of elements is distributed freely within a given space and time unit. And such a box inside of which the notes are floating, you can put into another environment, naturally. It's like putting an aquarium where the fishes are moving somewhere else in another environment where there's nothing is invalidated. You just put something from this moment into this one. So it must be so characteristic that I recognize it within this one. So they must be very different from the beginning, in order to make it possible that this one is remembered in this one clearly as something else that I have experienced before. Yes?
My wife was very philosophical and very much interested in things of mystery. It's curious to know where you think sound comes from.
Where
Where you think sound comes from.
Sound comes from the atoms. They're shaking, trembling. Is that an answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Pardon?
Wonderful one.
So then, shall we start then listening? Yes.
We have the records. We don't have the speakers to listen to them with.
Say it again.
Well, we don't have the speakers at home, even if we might have the record.
That's a very good remark, because first of all, listening collectively in a larger group is a quality which can never be replaced by listening alone or in a very small group, because then waves are building up, which are only possible in large groups. If the group is too large, then there are too many distorting interferences. But under certain conditions, a group experience creates its own music. which means its own network of vibrations. And the sound waves are just stimulating these vibrations that all of a sudden begin to vibrate in the individuals and meet each other. So this is very true. And then the power, the volume of air in such a room is very important. The more volume of air, the freer the sounds are. See, that's every sound needs its air, like we too. Every sound is an individual. And well, speakers are the most, as you know, the most old-fashioned device to reproduce a multiplicity of sounds through one cardboard piece, which is in one loudspeaker. We have 4, which is already some advantage. In order to reproduce, let's say, 80 people or 80 sound sources, we would need 80 speakers at least. And even then, the body of the speaker cannot provide the vibrations that a living body emits when it is singing or blowing. So that's always an enormous reduction. But I think such a volume is wonderful compared to the volume of a living room with a lot of furniture, etc. That it's very difficult to listen in a living room. That's why I always recommend earphones. Then everything is inside. And the physical is almost non-existent, the air. It's another experience, it's very important. What?
Actually, the music wouldn't be affected if we did keep the lights on.
Very distracting. Listen to music. Our response to the music would be affected if it like
we make an experiment. We do it now, as I thought it would be nice, and then we have a second tape, and then you will decide again. We'll switch them up. What I have said about the internal structuring of momente also applies to the choice of material. You may remember that the opening of this version started with the I am moment. It is an informal, indeterminate moment with the am characteristics. And it was what I call usually the applause moment. You remember there was an ordinary applause at the beginning, and it is one of the possible beginnings of momente. When I am is in the beginning, then the conductor comes on the stage, he makes his bow to the public. The public usually applauds when he comes in on stage. Then he turns quickly around, gives the sign, and then the whole choir starts applauding the public. And then one by one, in certain signs, this applause is structured. For example, and then again, normal applause, statistical applause, and then here and there, the first sounds come in from the bass singers. Oh, that, thou were my brother. And then again, vertical blocks of applause, and trombones come in with pitches, and more, this ordinary material is transformed into musical material, is musically organized. There is an aspect how material of the everyday experience is integrated into this work. There's hardly a clear borderline between what is musical material and what is material of our daily environment in this piece. The same is true for the choice of the verbal material. Between found objects of the daily life, you heard at the end, bravo, poo, etc. These single syllables that we sometimes use in public in order to praise something, to acclaim something, or to protest against something, are raw material. You will hear in the continuation, particularly here in the K moments, that I have used quite a lot of words, syllables, shouts that I have heard during the performance of my own music. from the side of the public. Stop it. This, ugly, beautiful, terrible, or be quiet, or all these sort of remarks that you hear. I have used them as material. And then I have indicated how these syllables should be used. For example, sometimes it's very strictly ordered in rhythms. I can only say it in German at the moment. Bravo, ja, nein, doch, nein, ja, ja, nein, nein, ja, nein, ja, nein, weiter, etc. It's then stylized. Or it says all of a sudden, ugly, beautiful, etc. They start singing like priests in a church with these words that I have heard on the part of the public. This is raw material that you can find here and there. Names, onomatopoetic material which imitates sounds that you hear in the world of the animals or where it is, in the traffic. Then the material that is already a little more structured. For example, at the end that you have just heard, in this moment and the moment, the solo soprano is given to the solo soprano a series of syllables like etc. And she can repeat them in any order, and each syllable several times, and then she is asked to use also certain intelligible words, and to use this whole material in order to tell the choir singers a story. And on the very day of that performance, for example, which happened in Donaueschingen, we arrived in Donaueschingen, there was the dress rehearsal, and all of a sudden the orchestra diener, the man who helps the orchestra, comes in and says, the trumpets and trombones have not arrived. So we had no trumpets and trombones during the dress rehearsal, and we had to rehearse without the brass. In the afternoon was the first performance at 5 o'clock, and still at 4:30 there were no trumpets and no trombones. Big excitement, 2,500 people had arrived for this festival in Donaueschingen. It's in a small village in the Black Forest in Germany, once a year. And then they decided very quickly to switch the programs. The La Salle Quartet that had to play in the evening should play at 5 o'clock, and eventually the trumpets and trombones would arrive by 8 o'clock. And I was in the hotel, ready to go to the hall, and then someone said, no, you have to wait until tonight. We have changed the program. About 5 minutes past 5, someone rushes into my room and says, they have arrived. Come in, we have to perform. And then the trumpets and trombones were outside of the hall in order to warm up the instruments. They had come in a private car. The box had simply been left in the radio in Cologne, and they were blowing, whereas inside the public was already waiting for the beginning. I jumped on stage and I said, good luck to all of us, and then we started. And then the solo soprano, in this moment, started doing her impossible, and the trumpets were not there. And then we were waiting all day. Isn't it incredible? She said to the choir singers, and the choir singers started letting go. And one by one they started laughing like you were laughing. And so this whole moment became a real moment, because she said, yeah, you remember that, and then she says, nein, ja doch, und dann die Trompeten waren einfach weg, she said. And they didn't come, the trumpet, and then we were waiting until 5:05, she said, imagine this. And the whole public didn't understand quite well what to say, but the choir was so heated up. It was the most marvelous performance you can imagine, because it was so real. There's another moment here, the MM moment, where in her solo, where she does all the hiccups, and hic-I-hic, and so she says, hic-I-hic, ja, etc. There she tells a story, she tells a riddle. And one by one, she reveals a place which is the gardens of Engadine, where something has happened. And she says, oh, it's of Eng. No, she says Ang, Ing, Eng. And then she says again, duk, 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 hik, etc. And then she says ga, 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 etc. So one by one, the vineyards in the garden of Engadine are revealed syllable by syllable, and all the all the phonetic material that is around it are variations of these syllables, which then come out one by one. So it's never just a game. There's always something behind, even structures which are purely phonetic. There we are. There is phonetic material which doesn't mean anything, and I write it even in phonetic language. For example, the second moment, you remember after the first one, the moment of applause, which one by one was transformed into music, then comes that moment, that doesn't mean anything, it is Rada, Radakaro, no. Rada, Radakaro. I just did it. Radabakaro, yes. Radabakaro, no. Rovodo, Rodovokudevere. There's just O, E. And then it says Yede, Kedele, etc. So there are concentrations of vowels, and combined with consonants as the beginnings and ends of certain syllables, which are nonsense syllables, but used purely phonetically, like timbres. Rada karabarovodo, rodovokudevere, that's it. Yede kedele, etc. Then there's other material that I found where I was working. For example, I have worked quite a few moments in an apartment in New York, because I had to teach in Philadelphia. And in that apartment there were books left from the person who had lived in the apartment before me. There was a book that I found written by the Russian scientist Malinovsky. The title of the book is The Sexual Life of Savages. And in this book I found many quotes from rituals from tribes in the upper Amazonas, which he then translated what they mean. And I have used, because I found this as material, quite a few quotes from this book. You remember just the moment, 2 months before it ended. No, excuse me, I was the one with the laughter and the giggling. I made a mistake. Is this one? 2 moments before the ending was this one. There you hear Galakasisabau. It says Löwen Auge. Galakasisabau. And the Ba'u is the name of a girl, and the Galakasisa are shouts that the girls are all shouting when they dance in a circle around one girl in an initiation rite. And they say, Kalakasisa Ba'u. Ba'u is the girl. Kasisam. That's what I have used as material. I tell you the meaning in private, if you like. And then...
You've told us already.
Not quite. No. Not that, no. Then there's other material that I have used from letters, which I got from a friend. The whole work is dedicated to a young woman. It is composition that has all to do with love relationship, in many different on many different levels. And I took segments from a daily letter that they would come with the mail in the morning. Alles mich herum ist mir ganz nah und fern zugleich. It is something that came in here. There are many other sentences like this. Everything surrounding me is near and far at once. There you have it. When I use, for example, inserts from such a moment where all of a sudden there is intelligible text, then the insert being put into another moment is sung in another language. So in this moment, everything here, in the MK moment, there is that German sentence. Alles um mich herum ist mir ganz nah und fern zugleich. And when this insert occurs for the first time in another moment, it says everything surrounding me is near and far at once. Then it goes on. So there the different languages come in. When there is intelligible text, I use in the whole work 4 languages. There is the language of the country in which the piece is performed, with the choir of the country, which means when we come to England next year, nevertheless the predominant language will be German, because we have rehearsed it with the German choir, and it will be a German choir coming from Cologne. If I would do it with the choir from England, the predominant language of the whole piece becomes English, which means everything that is in German, in original, is translated into English, and everything that is is called the second language, and the third language, and the fourth language in this piece, then is one of the other languages. In the German version, the second language is English, the third is French, and the fourth is Italian. So if you would perform it in Italy, then the first language becomes Italian, the second is English, the third is German, and the fourth is French. Or the third and fourth can be changed. Then the translations are given, and according to the place and the country where you perform it, then the predominant, let's say the degree of how much of each language is used in the piece changes. There is casual material from letters. And then in most of the moments, poetic material is used from the Song of Songs, from the Bible, the most objective love poem, because we don't even know any longer who has written it, and most of the people know it, so you can assume that it is a material that immediately rings a bell. And it is very beautiful, extremely beautiful. So you hear always little bits of the Song of Songs in the different moments. And I have very carefully chosen moments, excerpts which are more physical, less physical, more on a spiritual level in the Song of Songs. Oh, that Thou Were My Brother, for example, has nothing to do with a sex relationship when it occurs for the first time. So I use it sometimes in a very general context of what love or interest, mutual interest may mean. And then the most subtle material, so to speak, the most lyric material, I have chosen also from books that I had not in mind when I started, but that I found. In the same apartment that I mentioned before, I found a book with the collected poems of William Blake, and I took out a phrase which you have just heard very quickly and which will come now in the continuation in this moment here, sung very slowly and clearly by the solo soprano and not being disturbed by anything else, and which is somehow the essence of what I mean by moment, instant, now, here, the fulfillment, the degree of presence. And that phrase sounds as follows: He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. That's MOMENTE. We start now with the last moment, D. because you will hear the female singers in a line, not yet polyphonically like in the last moment. MD, and then comes the ID moment, which is the moment of the two Hammond organs. They have just one sound and change the color very slowly, and you dive into the inner of a long, sustained sound of 4 minutes. And then we come to the K moments, and then the end will be the I moment, which is a moment of very transcended prayer. You will feel that. He who kisses joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. That's coming now. Someone want to say something? Ask something?
Bravo.
Thank you very much for your attention. Good night.
What I would like to ask Karlheinz is, I'd like to talk to you privately in person. And also, I'd very, very much like you to take a couple of my scores back. And have a look at them.
You have them here?
No, I haven't. Naturally, I didn't
Yeah,
have
right.
a chance to see you.
Well, I will be here for another day, that's all.
I'm working tomorrow, and in the evening I'm giving a London University lecture, so I'm going back.
Well, I give you my address, it's so easy.
Let me send it to you then. I'd like that very much. And if you can do something about this, I think you do. Mind you, it's not your music. Your music is your music, and nobody cannot write music like yours. But it's something very, very special. And I'd certainly like you to have a look at it. Good.
Here you are,
Thank
no
you,
street
Carl.
address.
Oh, lovely.
Just arrived.
Within
Within a day.
I'll send it to you. I'll send them. I'll be very pleased if I'll hear from you and see what you think.
Yes.
Okay, bless you.
Thank you.
I'm very,
Night.
very,
Thanks for coming.
I've got the,
Thank you.
I've got the record of this, but it's much better here, much
Yeah,
better.
sounds bigger.
And some of the ideas are so beautiful, so emotional. But it's my world also. Yours. And,
Fine.
I'm very, very happy about it. I'm still concerned with lecturing. As a matter of fact, I do go with young people because they find that easiest to get hold of.
Right.
I'm doing at the moment in the London University class.
Good luck to you. Good night.
I wonder if I might say, excuse me, that you exemplify in the music what you say about the moment, because every moment you listen is a moment. You see, it exemplifies it there. I don't know if you recall it, but I think we met in Rome a number of years ago.
No, I don't. I don't recall.
Couldn't, well, you know, you look 20 years younger than you did 10 years ago. I was just saying this to someone. It was at the Chelsea's, Francis McCann in Chelsea. Remember Count Chelsea, who wrote a quartet,
Yes, I
one
know.
note?
But I can't remember.
It was boy Washington, but it was just really so tremendous what you have done. I decided that your sound trouvé makes you really kind of a percussive music. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So, thanks for tonight.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
I just got the application form from Darmstadt, and it says submit works for development in the composition studio by a certain date. What happens if no...
I have no idea, my dear.
No.
After Darmstadt came into trouble 2 years ago, the director, Mr. Thomas, has made several changes in order to meet the criticism of several groups that had protested in Darmstadt against his way of making programs and arranging lectures. And I assume that they want to give the possibilities to young composers to experiment among themselves. That's why they say you should bring equipment.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I will give 6 seminars, 3 on mantra, with the 2 brother Kotarskis playing the examples and the excerpts, and 3 seminars with Stimmung, tuning for 6 vocalists, also with the ensemble, the 6 singers. Now I will show the participants of the seminars a new technique that is used in Stimmung, the vocal technique, special technique that I have discovered for this particular piece. And I will show them how I have composed mantra.
Yeah.
And both works will be publicly performed at this occasion.
Yes.
We've heard about your Übereinstimmung, which is to be premiered in May, apparently.
It's a text piece.
Oh, yes.
One of those text pieces. Since Aus den 7 Tagen, I have written a whole book of other text pieces every once in a while. And ensembles who like to play these text pieces can play them.
Are they published?
Not yet, no.
When is Mantra to be published?
I don't know. At the moment, I have a break with my publishing.
Because Alphonse Kantarski told us last year it'd be about a year or so. It hasn't come out
No,
yet.
it will not. But the record is ready. It will come out any day. I have received already the first records.
Do Universal publish the score of Carré? Because I've been trying to find it all over the place.
Right. That is completely prepared, but 4 scores. It is a manuscript which is reproduced of the 4 orchestras and 4 choirs in 4 scores. And the total score...
There's a mic tap on the head. Yeah.